In 2002, the world witnessed the climax of a long dispute between Cameroon and Nigeria over their land and maritime boundaries. The dispute has been going on for years, with both countries claiming ownership of the same territory, particularly the Bakassi Peninsula. The territorial dispute between Cameroon and Nigeria over the Bakassi Peninsula is rooted in the legacy of conflicting British and French colonial agreements. The oil and fisheries-rich region has been at the center of conflict, with both countries claiming ownership, sparking tensions and minor clashes. In 1994, Cameroon took the case to the International Court of Justice (ICJ). Cameroon, claiming that colonial treaties gave them rights to Bakassi. Nigeria, on the other hand, argues that the agreement is vague and the territory belongs to them. The international law rule that was violated in this case is the principle of UTI, Possidetis Juris, which states that independent states inherit the existing borders of their colonial predecessors. Its legal basis is 1. The Montevideo Convention on the Rights and Duties of States 1933, which states that independent states have a definite territory, population, government, and the capacity to enter into relations with other states. 2. Customary international law, which states that states have a duty to respect existing borders and not use force to change them. In the case of Cameroon and Nigeria, both countries inherited a complex border from the British and French colonial periods. Conflicting colonial treaties and different interpretations of the border became the source of conflict. While both countries agreed with the principle of UTI Possidetis Juris, they had different interpretations of how this principle applied to their case, leading to a protracted dispute. Cameroon, sovereignty over the Bakassi Peninsula. Cameroon claims that the Bakassi Peninsula is part of its territory based on existing international agreements, including Thomson-Marchand Declaration of 1929-1930 and the Anglo-German Treaty signed in 1930. Cameroon argued that Nigeria had violated the principle of UTI Possidetis Juris, which required new states to respect boundaries inherited from the colonial era. Violation of international law. Cameroon accused Nigeria of committing aggression by occupying a number of areas in Cameroon, especially the Bakassi Peninsula, as well as violating the provisions of applicable international law, both conventional and customary. Cameroon asked the court to determine the maritime boundary between the two countries and provide compensation for damages resulting from Nigeria's actions. Nigeria maintains that the Bakassi Peninsula is part of its territory, citing the history and use of the area by Nigerians. Nigeria maintains that the Bakassi Peninsula was historically part of their territory. They refer to the Treaty of Protection signed between Queen Victoria and the King-in-Chief of the Akwa-Akba tribe, known as Old Calabar II. Europeans on the 10th of September 1884. This treaty allowed the British Empire to control the entire region around Calabar, including Bakassi. Counterclaims. Nigeria submitted a counterclaim stating that Cameroon had violated Nigeria's borders and committed acts of aggression in the disputed territory. Initial objections. Nigeria raised a number of initial objections regarding the jurisdiction of the court and the merits of the claims raised by Cameroon, including the argument that these issues should be resolved through bilateral negotiations. Requests for provisional measures. Nigeria asked the court to indicate the provisional measures necessary to prevent the conflict from escalating during the legal process. Guinean party. Third party. Equatorial Guinea applied to be involved in this case because the country has a direct interest in the determination of the maritime boundary between Cameroon and Nigeria, which has the potential to affect its maritime territory. Judges' consideration. The court decided that it had the authority to adjudicate this dispute in accordance with the declarations that the two countries had made under Article 36, Paragraph 2 of the Statute of the Court. The court had rejected initial objections raised by Nigeria, which argued that the dispute should be resolved through existing bilateral mechanisms. Considering that the negotiations carried out did not result in a satisfactory resolution for both parties, bringing this dispute to the International Court of Justice is considered a legitimate step and in line with international law. The court did not accept Cameroon's claim that the Nigerian state was responsible for violations of international law, citing a lack of convincing evidence. The court found that Nigeria could not provide sufficient evidence to support their counterclaims. The evidence presented by Nigeria was deemed insufficient to prove that Cameroon was responsible for the alleged acts. The court conducted an in-depth examination of 17 land boundary sectors and determined the appropriate way of interpreting these instruments, including Lake Chad, the Ebiji River, the Bakassi Peninsula, and other sectors. The International Court of Justice has agreed to accept Equatorial Guinea's request to be involved as an interested third party in this case. The application was submitted because Equatorial Guinea has a direct interest in the delimitation of the maritime boundary between Cameroon and Nigeria, which has the potential to affect its maritime territory. Judge's decision. Land boundaries on Lake Chad. The court has ruled that the land boundaries around Lake Chad are determined by the Thomson-Marshine Declaration established in 1929-1930. Contains the establishment of a clear boundary line between the territories of Cameroon, then a French colony, and Nigeria, a British colony around Lake Chad, which was then adopted through the Henderson-Florido Exchange of Notes in 1931 between England and France, which contained the confirmation of the boundary lines set out in the Thomson-Marshine Declaration. Land boundary from Lake Chad to the sea. The court ruled that the land boundary between Cameroon and Nigeria, extending from Lake Chad to the sea, should follow the line established by existing colonial treaties such as the Thomson-Marshine Declaration. Sovereignty over the Bakassi Peninsula. The court ruled that the Bakassi Peninsula was part of Cameroon's territory, based on the Anglo-German treaty signed in 1913, which contains the determination of the Bakassi Peninsula as part of Cameroon's territory. Therefore, this agreement must be respected in accordance with the principle of uti possidetis juris. Maritime boundaries. The court has determined the maritime boundaries between Cameroon and Nigeria in the Gulf of Guinea, while taking into account the claims submitted by Equatorial Guinea, which is also involved in this case. In accordance with the 1980 UN Convention on the Law of the Sea UNCLOS, where the ICJ uses UNCLOS as a basis for determining maritime boundary lines, especially Article 15, which regulates the center line. Apart from that, the ICJ also uses the main principles in maritime boundary delimitation, such as the equitable principles, which contain considerations of factors such as coastlines, sea depth, and the existence of natural resources in a fair and equitable manner. Not to forget, the ICJ also applies the median line principle. This principle states that the determination of maritime boundaries must be determined in the middle of the distance between the closest points on the coastlines of the two countries in dispute. Student analysis. The case of the land and maritime boundary between Cameroon and Nigeria shows the importance of respecting international agreements and the principles of international law in resolving border disputes. The International Court of Justice's ruling in this case provides legal clarity and contributes to regional stability in West Africa. This dispute highlights the application of the principle of uti possidetis juris, which is an important basis in international law regarding state borders. Students can see how this principle functions to maintain territorial stability after independence, as well as the challenges that arise when countries have different interpretations of existing colonial agreements. The ICJ's decision has the potential to affect regional stability and relations between neighboring countries, including Equatorial Guinea, which also has interest in maritime boundaries. Students can analyze how these disputes reflect broader international relations and their impact on regional security.